Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining today. I'm Jason Gumperk from msdynamicsworld.com. We are going to get the session started here momentarily. Thanks for joining. We're here with Andrew Waters and Michael Goldenberg of Mineral Tree for a session all about automating your PO process with Dynamics GP. I am going to hand things off to Andrew in just a moment. I want to just remind folks we do have a Q&A block where we do welcome you to enter your questions at any point throughout today's session. Also, be on the lookout for a few polling questions that we'll be putting out just to get a sense of your own experience and your own practices. So without any further delay, Andrew, I'm going to hand things off to you, correct?
Great. Thanks, Jason.
All right. Thank you and welcome, everyone. My name is Mike Goldenberg, VP of Sales here at Mineral Tree, along with my associate Andrew Waters. We've got hopefully an action-packed, information-packed webinar for you guys today to go over PO processing for Microsoft GP. And certainly as we go along, feel free to ask questions in the chat box on the side, or we'll be taking more questions at the end also. And certainly anyone that's interested in more detailed demo or anything like that, certainly let us know. Just as a very, very quick background on the company, we're out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, founded back in 2011. We've got over 1,000 customers, process over $3 billion in payments a year, and actually have about a dozen banks that resell our product as well under their own private label brand. So, we've got a lot of experience in the AP and payment automation space. We like to consider ourselves a leader in this space, in particular in terms of helping people with their payments, and card payments is a real strength for us. But as time has gone on, we've certainly moved a lot more in the direction of helping people with their PO matching process. And so today we'll go over just why POs have become a bigger thing. I'm sure most of the people on the line here today don't need me to tell them why, but we'll just review it quickly. Talk about how you take the pain out of reconciling and matching those POs, making sure it all works, of course, with your particular instance of GP, and then we'll hop into a demo with Andrew, who will take us through some of that stuff. And there's some nice pictures of us, although I'd like to think that I've lost a couple pounds since that picture. So why POs? It's pretty simple, right? You're trying to control spend on the front end versus the back end. You're trying to obviously manage inventory, things of that nature, but depending on your industry, things like that, certainly this becomes a bigger and bigger thing. But even if you're not in manufacturing or wholesale distribution or something that requires a lot of tracking of inventory, most businesses are moving more in this direction. We're certainly seeing that as a trend in general, both to improve cash management, cut down on errors, make it easier to track things, get rid of fraud, and also improve relationships. It's just that much easier with your vendors if you're not going back and forth all the time about, who owes who what and what's been ordered and all that good stuff. So just having a strong system in place, can be really helpful there. So one of the things I wanted to do, just to make this presentation as focused on the audience here in particular, I did want to launch into just some of the polling questions to get a better feel for the audience that's here with us today. So if we could actually just launch the first of the polling questions, that would be terrific. So, first off, wanted to just get a better understanding of the invoice volume that most of the people here today are dealing with or managing. We really tend to see any company that's doing at least 50 invoices a month is going to start to see some legitimate value out of a product like this. As soon as you start to get into the hundreds, thousands, now you're talking about, saving significant, man hours and money in that process.
And are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I am. I'm
Okay.
not able to see the results, though, to see if everyone's already put in.
We'll have those up shortly. I can tell you that about 55% said the 250 to 1,000 range, and then about 20% said 100 to 250.
Okay, excellent. So we've got the right audience. That's the first place to start, and it's not surprising. Certainly the people who are going to be interested in purchase orders, typically, you start to see those higher volumes. Can we actually launch the next polling question as well? A lot of these are really, again, just to get an overview of who we're dealing with here today. So the next part is just in terms of the percentage of your invoices that are related to a purchase order. Obviously, again, based on industry, sometimes you see an extremely high PO-based invoice ratio. But what we do see a lot of is people that have kind of this mixed bag of some POs and some operational, they'll have like PO-based invoices for inventory and things like that sometimes, and then for operational things, they may not necessarily have POs. And so actually one of the really nice things about our product in particular is that it allows you to have kind of this one singular process for both types of invoices that you're dealing with. And that is a big part of, finding a solution that's going to work for you, because if you go out and you find something that's going to solve for your PO matching problem, but the other half of your invoices have no PO related to them, and now you've got to have an entirely different process for those, you may not gain as much as you would have hoped just by resolving that one piece. And, I think one theme you'll hear throughout the presentation today is really just, addressing procurement, AP, all these things. A lot of times we see people often come in looking for one particular point solution. They're looking for something to capture invoices. They're looking for something to match invoices. They're looking for something to make payments of one sort or another. It's really when you start to get to having an overall solution that you really solve for the problem versus solving for a piece of the problem and then, again, having to handle everything else separately. But, it was good to see that there's definitely a good mix of, the percentages of people doing some mix. And, again, rarely do we see people where it's just pure 100% POs, but oftentimes it's somewhere in the middle, which we saw here with the results. So that's, again, good to see we've got the right audience. So let's keep moving. Again, I assume the audience here today pretty much understands the purchase order process. And, just to be very clear, MineralTree does not focus so much on the PO requisition process or the actual creation of the PO. But really, we focus on the matching of the purchase order and then the approval workflows that may or may not still go on with the invoices, and then all the way through payment and then actually closing out the PO in the accounting system as well. And again, that's a theme you'll hear quite a bit. Any solution you're looking at, you've got to make sure that there's an a really strong integration to ensure, especially with GP being an on-prem solution, you got to make sure that there's something that's really going to allow you to not have dual entry and constantly going back and forth between systems. You want to, as best you can, really be working out of one system. And as everyone knows, there's multiple forms of PO matching. Of course, you've got your two-way match, which we tend to see a decent amount of, but and you also have people doing a really intensive four-way match. I would say the most common thing we certainly hear is, a three-way match. You want to make sure, the quantity, price for the PO and invoice are matching, and of course that you actually receive the goods. And usually for a lot of our customers, that in itself is enough to approve an invoice for payment. Sometimes there's additional workflows, but really if they've got those three things in place, then everything's good to go. And so we'll talk through exactly how we help in terms of that. So you've got this process, you've got to match it. You guys are already doing it today, obviously, because you wouldn't have this process otherwise. But for a lot of people, it's just incredibly frustrating, right? You're looking at invoices in different systems. You're trying to pull them together. You're trying to, make sure everything adds up. You're emailing and walking over to people's desks to make sure things were received. It's not that the process of PO matching is complicated, it's that it's just time-consuming and tedious, and it's something where it's hard to get it all centralized in one place. And so that's why, we're throwing a lifeline out to people. When you think of the three-way PO match process in particular, again, that's what we're going to focus on here today. It's not just that you're matching a PO to an invoice, but you may be matching multiple invoices to a PO, or you may have some sort of master PO that you're going off of. So there's just a lot of different scenarios that can come up. There's all sorts of exceptions you've got to handle in terms of, whether the pricing doesn't look the same on the PO as the invoice, or there's additional charges or anything like that. But again, this is why this process is not necessarily so complicated, or, you have to be a rocket scientist to figure it out. It is just tedious and time consuming. And again, that's really where we're looking to help people, is to give you a consistent, much more simplified, centralized way to solve for that problem. So, again, with a three-way match, some of the advantages are just that, you have the ability to make sure that all of the right pieces are in place before making a payment. You're not, and there's a more consistent process for doing so versus chasing people around for everything. It does force greater discipline, governance, and control, just throughout the organization. And again, will allow accounting in general to sleep easier, knowing that they have much better visibility to their outstanding cash flow and things like that, versus random invoices coming in out of left field for $20,000, $30,000, $50,000, and you never know when they're going to come, and then it turns into a just a scary situation to figure out and get everything approved. The last thing is, the more efficient you are, the more you can focus on more important things. As much as we love accounts payable here because it's our business, the reality is it's not really adding value to most businesses, if any. It's somewhat a necessary evil. If most people could, they'd probably outsource it to someone else. If it wasn't for the fact that they really need the visibility and the control over those finances. But that being said, I've never heard anyone say, hey, we really want to add more, accounts payable people to the team to help the business grow. What you want to do is make sure that the work that those people are doing is of value, that something a human being should actually be doing versus the data entry, the chasing, the things like that. So what are some of the disadvantages? It can get a little bit complicated, certainly if you don't have an electronic purchase system or people aren't using it correctly, that will certainly impact it. If you're not confirming things and sending out receipts, obviously that's going to create issues. The other thing is, and hopefully no one takes this the wrong way, but oftentimes, we've seen this many, many times, sometimes the organizations seem to institutionalize inefficiency to, make sure they don't lose any sort of staff. But that being said, one thing that we've consistently seen from certainly our fastest growing customers and the ones who are being most successful, not just in accounts payable, but in their business in general, is that they are highly focused on making sure that each person is really adding value to the organization, and where they can pick up efficiencies and get rid of tedious manual low-value work with software and automation, they're doing that to make sure that the people are not only efficient in what they're doing and valuable in what they're doing, but it's more motivating, typically, the work that they're doing than, general data entry and things like that. There's a million ways that three-way PO matching can create issues, but oftentimes a lot of the challenges with it are the line items don't match, whether that's by description or small discrepancies, surcharges, taxes, unexpected shipping costs, whatever it may be. The PO went out as one thing and the invoice came back as another. The PO was for a table and chair set. The invoice came back for one table and 4 chairs, and just trying to be able to line all those things up can certainly be very tedious and take a lot of time. So some of the warning signs that you may see out there that gives you a pretty good indicator that it may be time to do something is if the first thing you're seeing is the invoice. Obviously that shows you the process is out of whack. Anyone who's getting calls from their vendors about late payments, certainly within the Mineral Tree solution, not only will you be very aware of anything that's a late payment, but also we're sending out detailed remittance for payments for you as well. So you don't have your vendors calling over and over again saying, when's it coming, when's it coming? They'll know as soon as that check is in the mail for them. Anytime, the accounts payable team, obviously they're happy to be helpful usually, but the more they have to deal with the suppliers, certainly just to answer kind of very basic questions about where different orders and POs are at, that's time that can be spent on other things. And certainly, when you're seeing price differences between what you're ordering and what you're being charged for, again, that's a pretty good sign that there may be something broken there. And, when you think about the cost of processing invoices, it's a lot more substantial than most people realize. I mean, this is just one, third-party research report, but when you look at the cost to process an invoice and a payment, it is substantial. And as much as most people would like to think they're a top performer in terms of this, and this is something we actually help people with, we can provide you with an individual business case for your organization to see where you stand here. But the reality is most people are actually somewhere between, probably a median and bottom performers because most people haven't automated. You're only getting down to $489 when you are doing, essentially straight through processing. But, we tend to see people certainly more to the $15 to $20 range. And that's not even us telling them. It's them, running their own numbers and saying, wow, we didn't realize how much this actually was costing us. And so automation is the answer. Again, what we are automating is really the most tedious parts of the process for you, ideally. We're retrieving the PO from your GP and bringing it into our system so that you can match it up with the PO or the invoice that you're receiving from the vendor. We're pulling in coding that you've already associated to the PO itself to our system. We will flag things when there is a mismatch so that you can at least see that here are the things that are not matching up correctly. Also, if you need to add in some sort of workflow, you can follow that, or if the PO matching itself is all that's required for an invoice to be approved, you can do that as well. And of course, you can, again, do both invoices that are related to a PO and handle those with a matching process, as well as non-PO based invoice where you can follow more of a typical approval process through our system, again, all through one workflow. And of course, our two-way API level integration into GP allows us to link the PO and the invoice itself and post it back into GP for you. And so when you think of the process in general, from obviously receiving invoice to paying the vendor, you can either get the invoice emailed in and we'll set you up with an email address, or you can, if it's a hard copy, something you can scan into the system and upload it. Or if you actually enter the invoice into GP, we can automatically pull it into the accounting system as well. But one of the really great parts of the product is that we do automatic invoice capture. So as the invoice comes in, we're capturing both header and line level information for you, and through a combination of both technology and human intervention for our product, you're getting 99.5% accuracy. So for those out there who have used OCR solutions in the past, you know how terrible they are. Technology alone is not smart enough to be able to identify all the different types of invoices and find the right numbers from the different places. Usually you have to spend a tremendous amount of time loading templates, training the system. It's a whole huge heavy lift on its own, whereas with our solution, out of the box, day one, 99.5% accurate. Then from there, this is what I was talking about in terms of if you've got a PO, if it's a PO-based invoice, right off the bat, you're using the PO matching process, versus if it's a non-PO-based invoice, then you're following normal workflows and getting approvals that way. But it's all going through one central process. Then from there, once the PO is approved to be paid, then you actually have the payment authorizer, who's usually either a controller, VP, director of finance, in some cases the CFO, in some cases the CEO, if there's a higher level of approval needed. And once that payment has been authorized, then we're actually sending out either the check for you, sending the ACH payment, wire, or credit cards. And we're not going to get too deep into the card thing today, but again, this is somewhere where we have a very strategic advantage against a lot of the other competitive products out there, in that not only can we offer you essentially an electronic payment network with over 500,000 vendors right off the bat, where you can earn rebates on your payments, but also you can use your own corporate credit cards. So most people are, getting travel and expense onto cards, but they're really missing out on a tremendous opportunity to get more AP spend onto cards. And we can, on a one-off basis, even show you based on your vendor list, here's how much you have in terms of potential rebates that you're leaving on the table right now. So we'll actually make those payments for you, send remittance with those payments, of course, so everyone knows exactly what they're getting paid for. And then we're constantly syncing back to the GP with all the payment details, attaching the PO to the invoice, and keeping it all together and avoiding any sort of dual entry for you. So in terms of when does it make sense to automate, well, certainly if you're at a webinar trying to figure out how to be more efficient, that's a good sign. Anyone doing 100 invoices or payments a month, the reality is that number is probably even lower. Anyone doing 50 or more, we've got plenty of smaller customers like that. Certainly, anyone who's fast growing, we've seen a tremendous amount of momentum for some of the fastest growing companies really looking to focus on this. So those who are familiar with Open Door, Home Advisor, Mashable, Ipsy, I could go on, but anytime you think about fast-growing companies, those are the ones who are really seeing a lot of value because it's a more scalable process. Anyone with multiple locations, multiple entities, trying to consolidate your AP process for maybe a lot of locations of a restaurant, whatever it may be, you're going to see a ton of value out of this. And certainly anyone who's concerned about fraud, both internal and external, you're going to get a ton of value as well, because anytime you move from a paper-based process to something that's, everything's being tracked electronically, you're going to deter a certain amount of issues just from that alone, but also just having everything be that much more trackable, that much easier to control, not having check stock floating around. You're going to be able to sleep at night a lot better, hopefully. And one of the most common questions we get is just, I've got this accounting system already. Why do I need more? Well, again, you wouldn't be here if you didn't realize that obviously there are limitations in terms of what the accounting system can do. Microsoft Dynamics GP is a great foundation, but they don't automate. It's more of a repository than actually helping you with the work. We will, they won't capture the invoices as they come, whereas we will capture that data. The different workflows and the ease of the workflows, being automatically able to code things like that, having certain hierarchies of approvals, being able to actually execute all the different payment types. Those are some of the things that you'll get beyond the accounting system, and certainly you'll see more of that in the demonstration. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it is very much an end-to-end approach. Solving one piece of the puzzle may make you feel better for the moment, but it doesn't solve the problem. And so, we really try and focus on the whole process from end to end, from the moment you receive the invoice to the moment the payment is made and recorded back into the accounting system. We believe it's important that you have one process for POs and non-PO based invoices. The other thing is we do have, like I mentioned, an API level integration where data is flowing on a constant basis in both directions versus many of the products out there today are still file based, which creates a tremendous amount of opportunity for discrepancies and issues, and you can certainly end up spending more time trying to figure out why the two systems don't match up, whereas, when you're moving that data more naturally through the APIs, you won't see as much of that. The level of quality, that's inaccurate. It's supposed to say 99.5% accurate, but that is not something you'll find really anywhere else that I know of. And certainly we can handle many bank accounts from any sort of, whichever bank you're dealing with. And we don't use any settlement accounts for the payments, which is a very critical thing to understand, because usually what's happening for products like ours is they're taking money, a bulk debit from your account, they're putting it into their account, and then they're dispersing those payments to your vendors. Not only is that time consuming, it's harder to track, it's harder for your vendors to know who they're getting paid by, and just, is not nearly as efficient as the way that we handle it, where we are sending those payments directly for you, whether it's check, ACH, or card payments. And so before we hop into the demo, I just wanted to drop in the last couple poll questions, because again, this may help Andrew tailor the demonstration a little bit more towards the audience that we have here today. Oops, you still there?
I'm still here. I'm sorry, were you asking for the next poll question?
Yes, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So this is one of the things that, certainly we want to better understand is, and this is somewhat a hard question to answer, because you may say I have, some invoices have 2 line items and some have 100. But just trying to get a sense of, generally speaking, the volume of line items a typical PO contains for the people in our audience today.
And we'll give just another 5 seconds on this one, and then show the results.
Okay.
All right.
All right, so it looks like we're seeing very typical results from what we typically see, which is, really in the, call it 1 to 10 line items per PO. There's certain industries, again, manufacturing, restaurants, sometimes you tend to see a tremendous amount of line items, but the average company, it doesn't tend to be so substantial, and it actually works very naturally with the way that, as you'll see in the demo, the workflow that we have. All right, and I think there's one last polling question.
Okay, that is up now.
And this is really, we're just trying to get a better sense of, when you're matching POs to invoices, we're trying to understand, do people typically keep it within, a threshold of either, dollar amount or some percentage? Do they need to make sure that every dollar matches dollar for dollar exactly? Or do they need to go even a step further, match individual line items and have every line item be exactly the same? All right.
And those results are
so, yeah, it looks like the majority are doing, and again, very similar to what we typically see. We see kind of this mix of A and C, which is people who are confirming the total of dollar amounts within some sort of threshold, and or they are doing actual line items and need to make sure they are exact. So very in line with the way we look at things as well. All right, and so with no further ado, I think we'll hop into the demo itself, and hopefully everyone will enjoy the show.
Thanks, Mike. So I'm going to go ahead and fire up a demo in just a second here. We should be looking at the MineralTree application now, and I'm going to go ahead and log into a test GP company we have set up. So in keeping with today's topic, I'm going to focus on and really highlight how the PO matching process works in MineralTree, but I'm going to contextualize it within the overall workflow and take you A to Z, starting with Invoice Capture, walking through different approval steps that might be used after an invoice is captured and matched to a PO, and all the way down to payment authorization and execution, so we can hit on some of the other points that Mike brought up in his presentation. So just a couple words before I dive into the workflow. As I mentioned, we're here in a test company that's syncing with a GP account. I can see up in the top right that I'm currently connected, which means data is flowing back and forth between the two systems in real time. We install a small program next to GP on the SQL server that houses GP called our connector. And it's going to check every 5 minutes for changes that are made, and any new records in MineralTree or GP are going to get synced to the other system. And that's what's going to be sitting behind this whole process. That's what's going to enable me to post bills back to GP, make payments and post them back, and match against purchase orders as they're being created in GP. And we'll go through all that in detail. And then speaking of the sync, I have some account information up in the top left. My general ledger cache is syncing over continuously from GP, and my bank cache can be displayed as well through a link directly to my bank account, so I can see both of those values side by side here. And then below that, I have an aging graphic, which just gives me a sense of the urgency of my outstanding bills. But I'll go ahead and jump into the invoices screen, which is really going to be my main center of operations here in MineralTree. The list of open payables, invoices in various states, some basic information in line, vendor name, amount remaining, due date, status of any invoice approvals. I can see, for example, that I've got 3 here that have been approved. If I scroll down, I'll see some others that are still pending approval in yellow. More on all that later. And then finally, I have an invoice here that's in a draft status, which means it exists in MineralTree but hasn't been posted back to GP. Where do these bills come from? As Mike mentioned, you can always create a bill in GP and sync it, and it'll sync over to MineralTree automatically, where it can go through workflow and be paid. But typically, you'll want to leverage our automated invoice capture functionality, which is going to take a lot of the legwork out of the equation. So I've got this example staples draft here. I'll go ahead and open it up. This is a document that was emailed into the system. We set every customer up with a unique email address, and vendors or the customer themselves can send documents directly to it. Once they're in your MineralTree inbox, they'll go through this automated invoice capture process where we'll pull a lot of the data from them. So vendor name, invoice number, dates, total amounts, All of that's been taken from the original invoice. There were 3 line items here, and we've captured those as well. So I've got one for 15, one for 600, one for 85. They're here along with the description that was read from the original invoice. And we've even done a little coding here as well. I set up a default expense account for this vendor, so that's been pre-populated as well. But I can also choose a different one. My list of expense accounts from GP is populated, so I can select from a drop-down or just type in the account I'm looking for. So I've got full flexibility to code this invoice, review the information was captured before either sending it along for invoice approval or posting it back to GP. Now, what if there's a purchase order referenced on the invoice? So if there is, our system is able to record that purchase order, and it will return that along with the other invoice data, and we'll use that to call up the appropriate purchase order from GP, and you can go ahead and match the bill with this incoming invoice. And I'll go ahead and jump to another example and give you a sense of what this looks like. Excuse me. So here's another invoice that was captured. Captured the vendor name, a PO number, 1034 was on there. All the other information's there as we remember it, invoice number, invoice amount, dates, and then individual line items. Now, because we've recognized the PO number right from the invoice, we've also called that up from GP. So purchase orders are still entered and approved in GP and received against in GP as normally. And as that's happened, all this information syncs over to MineralTree in real time, so I have it at my fingertips when it's time to match it against this incoming invoice. So it looks like the first line item here, cost per $75.25. And I've ordered 20, received 20. I can drill down and see a little more information on the receipt. So it looks like this was actually received in 2 batches here. And I can go ahead and link it to a particular bill line item by just typing in the PO line number down below and hitting link. This is going to do a couple different things. One, the coding is going to flow down so that the item from the purchase order is now displaying on the invoice in MineralTree. And it's also going to do some validation to see if there is a match between the incoming invoice and what was ordered on the PO. And indeed there is. The quantity and the cost per are matching up. Now, if I want to get a little more granular, I can do that as well. If we look at this second example here, again, it's been received in sort of 2 batches, and I'm just being billed for a quantity of 25 now, just for one of these receipts. So I can go ahead and match it not against the PO line, but actually against an individual receiving transaction from GP. And see, in this case, we can just bill out 25 of the overall 50, matching it against the first of these receipts that were generated in GP. Other logic still applies. I'm showing that this is matching against a particular receivable, and the item coding is flowed down as well. Now, in the event that this doesn't match up, we'll flag that as well, whether there's a discrepancy in the quantity or the cost per or the item. And based on that, you can choose to sort of override it and proceed. If you're maybe fine with just partially billing a purchase order at this point and, assuming the vendor's going to bill you again later. Or you can utilize our invoice approval logic to route it out to someone for review. And this can be done, sort of ad hoc on an individual invoice. I can type in the name or email address of an approver, hit save, and it's going to be routed out to them for review. Or it can be kicked off based on rules that I set up at the vendor level. And I'll go ahead and give you a taste of what that looks like as well. So if I open up the Staples vendor card, I'll see some basic information from GP, the vendor name, the address, the default expense account, default AP account, default terms that might be set up. And then in the bottom right here, I can set up some default invoice approvers. And it looks like there is actually already a rule set up for Staples. So right now I have every invoice being routed to Christina for approval, and then if it's over 20,000 to myself as well. So I can set up these tiered thresholds, these dollar-based thresholds. I can have up to 4 in total on this vendor to set up a default workflow that's going to be followed. And now this would be followed for any invoice that's not based on a purchase order. However, if it is going to be tied to a PO, we can skip normal invoice approval if it's a match and still follow these rules if it's mismatched. The idea being that any invoice that's matching one-to-one with a purchase order probably doesn't need to be approved again since the PO itself was approved earlier. Non-PO based invoices or those with a discrepancy, you might want to send through an approval process. So we can set up that logic in MineralTree as well. From the invoice approver's perspective, they're going to get an email prompting them to review the invoice or invoices that are being sent to them for their approval. They can take a look at the original document that was captured. They can see the associated purchase order if that's applicable. They can review all the coding, everything that our accounting manager has user to, they can see as well, potentially. And then they can either approve or reject the invoice. And they can add notes as well, so they can explain any potential rejections. And as sort of the main accounting manager user here, I'm going to get feedback right away. I already called out these invoice approval statuses here. I can see what's approved to be paid. I can also filter this view if, say, I just want to look at bills that are approved. I can do so. Now, when I have gone through whatever invoice approval and PO matching process I need to, I'll, want to post all this information back to GP. We'll sync the bill back to GP. We'll update the associated purchase order as well, closing it out if necessary. And at that point, I'm ready to go ahead and actually make some payments. So I'll grab 3 of these approved invoices and add them to the payment queue on the right, where I'm going to have a couple different options. I can edit the amount if I want to make a partial payment against a particular invoice, or I can change the payment date. So by default, not set, this payment is just going to go out as soon as it's approved, but I can schedule it to go out at some future time as well if I prefer. I'll go ahead and confirm these 3 payments. It's going to ask me just to double check the payment account I'm using to pay the vendor and also the payment type. Each vendor has a default payment type, whether that's check, ACH, or credit card, but I can override that here as well. So I'll go ahead and submit these. No payments are actually going to be issued yet. This is going to take us to sort of the second major module of the application, the payment authorizer, where a different user, usually someone like a CFO or controller, is going to have to review all the information and sign off on the payments before they can actually be released. And this truly segregated payment approval step is a key component of the application's security and controls. Every payment is going to need at least 2 pairs of eyes before it goes out. So I'll log into the same demo company. It's actually going to trigger a 2-factor code. So this 6-digit number was just sent to my phone, and I'm going to have to put it in before I can get into the application. This is an optional feature, but definitely one that we strongly recommend to provide an extra layer of protection against any potential account takeover. Once I have logged in, I'll see a familiar layout, a lot of the same information. You'll recognize the account section up there in the top left, but the aging graphic is gone. It's just directing my attention towards the payments that are awaiting my attention. And right now, those are just those 3 payments we submitted a moment ago in the awaiting approval category here. So let's go ahead and take a look. Some basic information is here in line. If this is enough for me to act on, maybe it's a monthly payment that I recognize, I can approve right from this screen or even approve an entire batch in one go. But I'll also be able to drill down and see all of the information regarding this payment. So this is going to include some vendor information. I can compare, I can see what account is being used, I can see the payment type is going to be ACH. I can compare this to a list of recent payments to this vendor, see any notes that have been added along the way, and at the bottom here I can see all the invoices that are included in this payment. So all the details we saw before are available here, including the status of any invoice approval requests. I can see that this was approved and by whom. I can see any documents that are associated with this invoice, including the one that was captured at the beginning of the process. And I can see how individual expenses are coded. I can see those distributions. I can see associated purchase order matches as well. If all looks right and I'm ready to pay this, I'll go ahead and approve. It'll move me down my queue on the left-hand side. I can keep approving as I see fit. If I do choose to reject a payment, it's just going to ask me to explain why. Maybe it wasn't coded correctly. Maybe I'm just not ready to pay it. Maybe there was no backup. I'll go ahead and reject this, and it's going to send a message to my accounting managers so they can fix whatever the issue was and resubmit it to me for approval. Segregation of duties cuts both ways. Just as an accounting manager can't process a payment all the way through on their own, I, as the payment authorizer now, can't make changes to that payment without someone else reviewing it. I will go ahead and confirm these two payments and get them sent out. It's going to give me one more glimpse into my GL cache. And after I hit submit, my work is done. MineralTree is going to handle everything when it comes to actually making these payments and syncing that information back to GP. As Mike mentioned, a key part of our philosophy is that we do not employ a settlement or intermediary account at any point. So we're never debiting our customers' accounts and dispersing funds to their vendors on their behalf. It's always a transaction directly between MineralTree customer and their vendor. For checks, that means we're generating a check image and printing it. This has your signature, your microline information on it, and it's going to clear just like any other check. No money is debited from your account until the vendor actually deposits that check. In the case of an electronic payment, whether that's ACH or a credit card, again, we'll handle all the heavy lifting on our side, generating the necessary payment file and sending it off to be processed, either directly to your bank or to a card processor so the vendor can get their money. In all cases, we'll send emailed remittance to vendors so they know what they're being paid for. It'll list any invoices included in the payment and give them an estimated delivery time. Particularly helpful in the case of ACH or card payments where the vendor doesn't have the benefit of a check stub to reconcile against. Now in the background, remember our sync to GP is active. So as soon as I make these payments in MineralTree, we're also going to sync that back into GP. So after all these payments process, I'll have a batch of payments in GP along with the associated check numbers. All of that information is going to be back in my system of record. So even as it will live in MineralTree forever, I can continue to leverage any reporting that I typically would within GP. That still remains my system of record. So that sums up an overview of the process. We've got a good chunk of time here to answer any questions, which is great. So please don't hesitate to type them in to the chat window, and Mike and I are going to try to get to as many as we can.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, and to everyone in the audience, please do take a moment now to enter in any questions, perhaps a comment related to the polls that we asked earlier as well. And I'll just give a moment for those questions to see what people have to ask. While we're doing that, I'm also just going to launch one final poll question, really just to get feedback from you individually. Just to give a chance to indicate any interest you have in following up, talk about your own specific needs, indicate any particular interest. So let me check the Q&A again here. Well, I am not seeing any questions at this time. If you guys, so Andrew or Mike, if you want to put up any contact information, I'm sure people would appreciate that too if they do want to follow up after the live event here. So there is a question asking about syncing. Is the syncing done every 5 minutes, or can you adjust the time to, say, do 10 or 15 minutes?
Potentially, we can alter the time frame on the sync. It's something I think we've done rarely in the past, but yeah, that is something that is configurable per customer. We found that 5 minutes is sort of a good sweet spot in terms of getting it to sync often, but not so often that we're constantly pinging your GP server. But that is something we can tweak.
All right, excellent. I want to also remind folks we do appreciate any feedback you can provide on today's event. We'll have a a little survey that'll pop up after we depart today, and then any feedback you can give about the quality of the session or any other feedback about your experiences. I know we always appreciate it, and our speakers do as well. Well, I'm going to make a final call for questions here, but otherwise I think we are ready to start wrapping up. So Andrew, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to present today.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Jason.
All right, and it does look like we have another question now. Could you go over the process of capturing the original documents? This person notes that they noticed a Google Drive link in your toolbar.
Sure. The Google Drive link in my toolbar is actually just an internal folder that I'm using to collaborate with the members of the team here. Not related to the product or our process at all. But that's a good sharp spot there. Yeah. So to get a little more detailed on that. So we set up, again, an email address for every customer, a unique email address, so vendors can send documents indirectly. Customers themselves can forward it along. We talk to a lot of people that have an AP mailbox set up already. And the way the capture process works is actually a combination of a couple different OCR engines and then an element of human review as well, all provided by us. So when we return the data, what's actually happened is that we've pulled all the information we can off of it electronically, and then someone's gone in and reviewed all of that to make sure it's accurate and in line with what we should be reading from the invoice. So by adding this human element, we get much more accurate, and we can also be a lot more flexible with the format of invoices we're able to process. You don't have to teach the system a different template for every vendor. Right from day one, you can send documents in, and we'll be able to capture them accurately.
All right. Thank you once again, Andrew, and we will end it there. So that concludes today's event, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.